Hi, my name is Filippo Sciascia. I'm an artist living in Bali. Primitive learning, it is a kind of research of trying to reconstruct biological process, evolutionary society. And I see the pattern of a relationship between the evolution and the system of learning, the biology applies, the evolutionary process in mankind applies. So I see this kind of narrative became the point where it made me understood that actually is a process of learning that starts in a primitive form from millions of years ago until up today. If we see, it's always been a relationship between sharing information. I see this fact, for example, in the first shelter. That's why you see in the show you see a lot of cave represented, and cave are places where we get together and to share information, either making marks on the wall or making representation of the world outside. So this was the first form of sharing information in creating languages. And that's the same thing we do still today, where we still is always about information. When we look at, for example, at the artificial intelligence, it's still about conveying a message, conveying information. So whether it's a mark on the wall or the hash code is still a symbol that contains the information. And it's quite ironical because the first symbols in case were like round shapes and just marks, just like one and zero. And the hash code is still making out of one and zero patterns. So out of all these millions of years of evolution, we see the main kind of way to transfer information is being changing in terms of techniques, but the core of the importance of the fact is the same. And if you want to see this biologically, you can look at, for example, the DNA. The DNA is just a sequence of information. You put the same molecule on different pattern to share different kind of information. You can see this in nature all the time. We can look at the molecule of hydrogen, and it's just a molecule of hydrogen behaving. And if we see a molecule of hydrogen can be existing on its own, but when the two combine together, they share another information, transform into water. So I see that that's why biologically it's a process of learning, of combining different combination to address a different information. So you see this biologically, you see this in a technique. Mankind, parallel with technique, is being always a growing pattern. That's why we can literally trace the invention of painting in the caves with the most contemporary media of making images. It's always about conveying an information. But if there is an exhibition that I felt more than the other for its importance, it was because the importance of the place where it was held. And it was the National Archaeological Museum in Naples, because it holds the most important collection of artifacts from Pompeii and all the Roman era. So it really has all the variety of classical sculpture that always influenced me in my beginning as an artist. So being able to do a show and confront with those collection, that was a very interesting project for me as well, because it was together two of my favorite artists, and important as well as John Tani and Ashley Bickerton. So it was, yeah, it was very interesting for me to collaborate with these artists within the context of the National Archaeological Museum. My story between being born in Sicily and spending time in New York and living in Bali is a mixture of coincidence and other events that happened in my life. Surely, I'm glad and I wouldn't change them because Sicily is really where I see my foundation. And I believe very much in the fact of the fragment. Fragment has foundation, relationship with the past. And that's what I really made my foundation as an artist. I think I still carry them today. And within those foundation, I can build and innovate in my work. While regarding New York, I was there since early age. I often go see the rest of my family, which still is in New York. And there was a very interesting read because the differences between Sicily and New York were so immense. And it kind of opened up my eyes since I was a kid and give me the chance to see other form of arts, and especially like contemporary art, all the modern art. So I kind of see that constant shift between an ancient culture with ancient artifacts like you could find in the areas of Sicily and the new world and the new contemporary art where I was seeing when I was a kid in New York. So these two aspects was very interesting. And the world with me naturally, that's why I said earlier, is a coincidence, but it's also something that naturally happened to me. And I make a lot of benefit. And let's say that it was a cumulative gift that helped me to to be the artist I am now, the person that I am now. Bali, it was something in between these two places. But ironically, these are the whole three islands. You know, Sicily is an island, Manhattan is a small island, and I'm in Bali, which is another island. And this was kind of interesting for me. It seems like wherever I go, by coincidence, I end up being an island. And even when I was growing up in Florence after New York, somewhere at the back of my head, I always knew that I would end up in some other island, and it happened to be Bali. I choose the subject of the cave because the cave represents one of the most important evolution in mankind. It was probably the biggest cognitive revolution because it was within the cave we start to represent images on the walls. So we have to imagine there must be a moment in time where all the images were kept inside our brains or all the signs were kept inside. There was no way to express them. And there was a moment where we could free those images from our brain and literally making them alive outside our brain. And those images became traditions, and those traditions became cultures. So this was the biggest cognitive revolution. Together with the image of the cave or other images that I use as a icon in my works, I start to be interested very much in diagrams and phylogenetics. Now, diagrams are drawing that explain verbally simplify ideas, while phylogenetic instead are still drawings with verbal description that goes in detail to each evolutionary model. I find a very important thing in my work when I start to discover this phylogenetics because if you actually really, I feel that they really work the way my brain works, in the sense that I can picture something like a cave to describe this cognitive evolution that happened millions of years ago in caves and connects technique, the way we perceive information in the beginning, the way we perceive it still now. But with phylogenetic, I can, during this projection, I don't need to be very straightforward. Every time there is a link that will develop in something else, I can describe that. In other words, is that I can describe the same idea, let's say, of the cave with the material itself. If I'm using the electricity in the cave painting, how can I still talk about electricity without painting in cave? So I'm evolving. This is another branch in this phylogenetic diagram that I'm doing. And that's when I start to develop these paintings with the black sand, the volcanic black sand, because the volcanic black sand contains already the essence that capitalize the concept because the quartz involved and contained in the sand, it is used in technology, for example. There's no technology today that we can see without use of quartz. There will not be microchips and so many, but most of all in technology. and you need the quartz to stabilize energy. So it's another way to talk about the same important fact of electricity, for example, as a light, as a energy source, but is not represented in a figurative painting like in the cave, but is representing itself as the material containing its qualities. During the years, I developed other kind of ways to express the concept within the material I use because they contain already the information. Like the quartz I said earlier, or like the glass. I did a whole series of painting containing glass, which is not to be seen as the traditional glass in front of a painting, because the glass essentially is lava sand or normal sand, soda ash, and then limestone. So I've been doing out of these three material pigment to make paintings: limestone, black sand, and soda ash. You get glass. So the material are representing the concept itself. Other ways to do this, to describe the light importance, is by using melatonin powder from the, because melatonin powder is what we secretes from our pineal gland, and it's what it works through the daylight, and through the daylight it accumulates in the brain, and during the night when the light is absent from the sun, we produce this melatonin powder. I've been working a lot between the representation and what can represent itself. So within this frame in mind, I represent sometimes something like a cave as it looks like, or I use a material to represent the same concept, but manifesting that concept within the material itself. So like I do with quartz sand, volcanic, or like I do with melatonin powder. Lately I've been experimenting as well with soil, because soil is something that we take it for granted. It's a very thin layer of all the earth, but within that very thin layer, it's very fascinating that that's where all the life happens. It's a very thin part of the earth crust. Yet, all the life happens there. All the agriculture, everything happens between this very thin layer. And that was very fascinating for me. Such a fragile thing, yeah, very dusty soil contains all the life we need on this planet. So, within this in mind, it was a good way to represent again another material because that's where the energy goes, for example, right? That's where the plant grows through the photosynthesis. So, within this in mind, I start to do a few paintings just by using, making essentially a pigment, a color that is made by earth brown soil. Yeah, light has been always at the center of the work. Whether the work is for your consideration only, for Rising, Sophia, these are the previous video project that I've done, or Primitive Learning, or Lux Lumina, light has always been at the center because light, it is the one thing that we can literally say that it's all we know about the world. And in his absence is all we don't understand about the world as well, in the absence of light. So within this word that I just said, I can base our whole body of work that can really explain or manifest the whole evolutions of societal. You can trace literally the invention of fire to the fuel, light, to the industrial revolution, to the digital revolution. All is possible because of the light. Light as a natural phenomenon or the invention of electricity. Still, we rely, the whole technology relied on that before. And today, all the digital technology still relies on electricity. So that's how important is these things that we take it for granted. And is also the way we communicate today. All the digital information is still forwarded by electricity and cables. So you have this aspect of the importance of light. There is technological, there is biological within us, We need a day and light rhythm. And I use those ideas to make artworks. Yeah, I start to use the electricity light in the paintings because I've done already a lot of experimentation where I paint the light, but the light can never be represented by a pigment. I wanted to use the real essence in the sense that I want to use the real electricity. So it's not just creating the effect of light, but the idea of using, like I use melatonin powder or the other element that carry the real density of the message. By using the real electricity in the painting, I feel like I'm using again another element that is not mimicking the effect, but is actually it is. That's why I use the electricity in the paintings. Yeah, Bali is the place. It became slowly the place in between Sicily, Florence, and New York. Yeah, I don't find a better way to describe it. Like a stasis, where there is no the heavy background, historic, like Sicily or the compulsive life of New York, was a place in between where actually allowed me to create and become what I am. That's what I've been creating here for most of my life. I tell you one thing that I really feel about being father, and probably many fathers will share the same feeling. It is the fact that once you became father, the thing that really did was making me focus so much between work more than life personal feeling. A lot of things like clutters that were worrying me or were part of my daily life just completely vanished because having a son and or a daughter, it really focuses you, narrows down. It's a clearer view of what it is your duties and what is your prime love. And yes, since the first moment when they're born, you just focus on that very instinctive love. That's the real light. Well, for me, it's always the same. When I do an exhibition, it's more to start a dialogue, and the work is the question. In the work, I make a work to start a conversation with the viewer. Let's say for the work of the cable bacteria, it's just a mass of cable. But then I wrote cable bacteria. This will inspire the viewer to understand what is a cable bacteria. Most of us are unaware of that. So you can tell the story of new recent technology that have been discovered. And so like this, in this case, on other works, why there is electricity in a painting, why there is a melatonin pill powder in a painting. So we can tell the story about the pineal gland, or we can tell the story about behind the quartz. It's not just because of the beautiful effect of the volcanic sand, but because within the volcanic sand, there is something that has to do with technology that we all use today. So in the end, is always to start a conversation about what's important today, what has been important in the past, what is the connection between primitive and learning process that we do. So I try to compromise those two aspects in the representative painting and the represent object itself to initiate a conversation. So that's what I expect from the viewer, that they can trigger that question. Why there is the electricity and why the light effect is not painted. So I can tell you the story about how electricity is so important and vital in our daily life and in our technology that allowed us to adapt to our environment. So within this context, or the cable bacteria, for example, why the cables? Because the cable bacteria could be a very important and new resource for energy, which doesn't impact the fossil fuels that we're using today. So all these idea for our current infrastructure, or where those come from. When I use charcoal, for example, you can refer to the Industrial Revolution. Yeah. So throughout and out, you have always a way through the work to initiate a conversation.